千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I would like to extend a warm welcome to one and all. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Chapter 81 is the very last chapter of the Tao Te Ching, so it is significant for that reason alone. It is also significant for many other reasons, and I want to walk through all of those reasons with you one by one. Starting with the chapter title. This particular chapter title, again, 3 characters. And those of you who have been following this talk for some time, you can probably readily identify the first character there. It's the character for no or not. And then the last character, the one on the right, is the character for chapter. And then the character in the middle is the character for accumulate, to add to something. So together, translated as do not accumulate, this is a final reminder from Lao Tzu that as we live a life in accordance with the Tao, it is not a life with ever more complexity where we keep adding stuff to it. It's a life of increasing simplicity where we let go of more and more. Now, previously, I talked about how chapter 81 follows chapter 80. The two are concluding chapters to the Tao Te Ching. An even better way to think of it is that chapter 80, the previous chapter, concludes the De Jing, the virtue classic. The virtue classic goes from chapter 38 to chapter 79, for 42 chapters, 43 chapters if you include chapter 80 as well. Chapter 81 concludes the totality of Tao Te Ching, which is the Tao and Virtue Classic. Now, this is something that I have talked about before, but I don't believe that I have ever presented it in a way that is graphical and easy to grasp. So here is an opportunity for us to do that. I want to show you this particular graph. It uses this box to represent the Tao Te Ching itself. So you see the 3 characters there for Tao Te Ching, translated as the Tao and Virtue Classic. Now, I would be so bold as to proclaim that this is really the best possible translation of the title. How can I make that claim? Well, let me explain. The first character is a character for the Tao, so it appears as the Tao in the title. The second character is De, that's the character for virtue. And then the last character there, Jing, is the character for classic. Not book. A book would be like Shu. Jing is a classic. That's a distillation of wisdom from ages past. So there is a difference. Now, the Tao Te Ching, the Tao and Virtue Classic, is actually divided into 2 sub-volumes. The Tao Classic and the Virtue Classic. The Tao Classic is known as the Tao, as Tao Jing, the Tao Classic. It goes from chapter 1 to chapter 37. Now there are 81 chapters, as you can see, so there is a gap between 37 and 81. From chapter 1 to chapter 37, the focus is on the Tao. It begins on chapter 1. The first line says, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. It starts out introducing the concept of the Tao. In the concluding section of that, the last chapter of the Tao Classic, it says the Tao that is constant in non-action. It starts with that line also about the Tao. So it begins and ends with the Tao. Virtue is something that's brought up, but it's not discussed nearly as much in Tao Jing, the Tao Classic. It appears in 4 out of 37 chapters. So you can see the emphasis is definitely on the Tao and not virtue. In the second section, the second sub-volume, virtue appears many more times. So the second section is the Virtue Classic, De Jing. It goes from chapter 38 to chapter 80. Now, if you take a look at the sub-volumes, each one has 2 characters in the name, Tao Jing and then De Jing. So the way that you would translate that as a title would be the Tao Classic, or alternatively, the Classic of the Tao. But the Tao Classic fits the original better because when you start doing the Classic of the Tao, it becomes rather wordy and it starts to feel different from the original. Same with De Jing, the Virtue Classic. 2 characters. The first one is about virtue and the second one, same, classic. When you combine the 2, you naturally get the Tao and Virtue Classic. Just by looking at this and knowing what the sub-volumes are, it is easy to see that there's only really one best way to translate the title. You are going to see many other attempts to translate the title. Most of them are done by people who don't really know about this division. And that's how you get things like the way and its power. Well, De Jing is about virtue. It's not about its power of the Tao. It's partially about that, but it's mainly about virtue as the best way to live, virtuous existence, human virtues. How do we know that? Well, look at chapter 38, the first chapter in the Virtue Classic, and then chapter 80, the last chapter in the Virtue Classic. Chapter 38 starts out by saying high virtue is not virtuous, therefore it has virtue. This is moving away from the Tao that is the overarching concept for everything, moving into De, which is the way human beings interact with one another. This is how we treat one another, how we live with one another. Therefore, chapter 80, small country, few people, suddenly makes a great deal of sense because this section or sub-volume, the Virtue Classic, is ending by talking about the physical manifestation of virtue. You see, the ideal place of the Tao is the place of virtue. There are 43 chapters in all in the second section, and 11 out of the 43 focus on virtue, which is way more than the 4 out of 37 in the Tao Classic. So this is the virtuous place. It is the good place, the place for good and kind people. And it's a coincidence, but there's a show called The Good Place where the name, The Good Place, is synonymous with heaven. So one can say that this is depicting some sort of utopian setting or a paradise, a heavenly setting, but it's actually more like heaven on earth. It's an ideal place that we can create. It's an ideal place that is humanly possible. So this division here makes it clear and easy to perceive. This is among the, what I would call the lost knowledge of the Tao Te Ching. Once I point it out, it becomes the most obvious thing in the world. Well, of course, it's called the Tao Te Ching because it's composed of Tao Jing and De Jing. Sometimes people who don't know this, who have not seen this, they may exclaim, of course, it makes sense. It's been right in front of me all this time. I just never noticed. Some who have studied the Tao Te Ching for years may actually be surprised. They may ask, why hasn't anyone talked about this? It seems so basic. Indeed, I think there are many bits and pieces like this that are missing or glossed over in the Western study of the Tao. It's not talked about usually for the simple reason that many authors in the Tao genre learn from secondhand sources, and lacking access to traditional authentic teachings, invariably there is gonna be good stuff that is lost in translation. You can probably imagine this is a motivating factor for me to be doing these Sunday meetings. I would like to add value for everyone by bringing this kind of knowledge to you, by shedding light on it. So to continue with our discussion of 81, let's take a look at this final chapter that concludes the entire Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching, chapter 81. True words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not true. Those who are good do not debate. Those who debate are not good. Those who know are not broad of knowledge. Those who are broad of knowledge do not know. Sages do not accumulate. The more they assist others, the more they possess. The more they give to others, the more they gain. The Tao of heaven benefits and does not harm. The Tao of sages assists and does not contend. That's chapter 81 of the Tao Te Ching. Now, I would like to divide it into sections and show you guys how those sections are identifying themselves. So first of all, there are 3 distinct sections in this chapter of the Tao Te Ching. And I'd like you to take a look at the Chinese characters of the 3 different sections and see in the structure that you can divide them up in this fashion. Now, how do we arrive at this? Let me explain. First, I want to invite everyone to take a closer look at the characters for the first section, lines 1 to 6. You're going to notice many repeat characters. And the one that I would like to identify first is going to start with the first character that is repeated as the last character of line 2. This pattern is persisting for the next 2 lines. The first character of line 3 is the last character of line 4. the first character of line 5 is the last character of line 6. This actually helps us identify subsections because the first section is composed of 3 sets of 2 lines each. On the right-hand side, I've also identified the English word that corresponds to the Chinese character to the left-hand side. You're going to notice that they are translated the same way for consistency. We want to be consistent as much as possible, and when we fall out of that consistency, there has to be a good reason. Now, I know that among the first 6 lines, those are not the only repeat characters. The most obvious repetition is the 3rd character of each line. Let me round them up so you can see them. The 3rd character is the same throughout. You can even see it extend into line 7. But line 7 is already off on a different topic. So that's a coincidental match of the 3rd character. You can also see that the 2nd character, there are similarities. It's the same character from line 1 to line 2. Then it's the same character from line 3 all the way down to line 6. Furthermore, you can detect a similar first character, last character match in the 3 couplets. That is, the last character of the first line is the same as the first character of the 2nd line. The last character of line 3 is the same as the first character of line 4. The last character of line 5 is the same as the first character of line 6. So there's a great deal of similar characters, same characters to detect just in the first 6 lines. But now we can see without a doubt that the first 6 lines are basically one section out of the entire chapter. Now let's take a look at section 2. I'm going to identify the characters that repeat in section 2 and the corresponding translations. So you can see line 8 and line 9, they actually form a section of 2 lines. And then line 7 is just the introductory line for those 2 lines. Now what about section 3? Well, section 3 also has a great deal of poetic matching construction. First, I want to point out that the last 2 characters of line 10 are the same as the last 2 characters of line 12. Translated the same way, the Tao of. So, for fun, you could actually write down your name and then append these 2 characters, and there you have the Tao of your name. Now, that's not all. There's more. The last 4 lines form 2 subsections as well. And you can see that the middle 2 characters of line 11 correspond with the middle 2 characters of line 13. They're translated the same way. So now you see the sectional analysis for chapter 81, 3 sections, intro, the main body, and then the conclusion. It is time for us to go into it line by line. Starting with line 1. True words are not beautiful. Let me start with the very first character, 信. So the pinyin is xin, the X is supposed to sound like sh, so 信. The meaning of this character is trust, believe, belief. So it can be a verb or a noun. You combine it with the second character, 信言, Second character means words. So words that are trusted, words that are believed. Meaning words you can believe in or trust to be true. True words. Now, it's not just any statement that is true or factually based. In this context, it is specific. It's about a truth that is blunt and direct. It's a home truth. It's a truth that needs to be talked about, that needs to be brought out. It's basically words of honesty that don't gloss over anything, that don't beat around the bush, that don't try to spare someone's feelings. And no one will say such words usually because everybody wants to be the nice guy, fearing to offend. Nobody wants to be the bad guy. This 信言 is the kind of words that when someone finally says them, you hear people express relief. You hear people say, finally, someone said it, because it needed to be said. So now let's continue on to talk about the meaning of this line. These are oftentimes the words that need to be said, and they are not beautiful. True words are not beautiful. Not beautiful in this context means unpleasant or uncomfortable. And this is because people usually want to hear what is quote unquote nice in their perspective, especially if it strokes the ego or if it reinforces an existing belief. Now, we usually avoid telling the truth for a number of reasons. Let's take a look at what those reasons may be. I mentioned not wanting to hurt someone's feelings. Well, it would be the opposite of something that's polite, politically correct. It's a truth that may anger some people. It may be that there's something that you want to point out that you know is not what another person expects to hear. It is not something that will be what Lao Tzu describes as beautiful. It will be something that's, as I said, unpleasant or uncomfortable. Sometimes we want to avoid telling the truth because we don't want to cause embarrassment. This could be embarrassment for someone, or it can be embarrassment for yourself. For instance, it may be the admission of a mistake or a fault. You may not want to say, I feel bad about this, but here's what I did. So this is not the same as hurting someone's feelings, although when you cause an embarrassment for someone else, that can be hurting that person's feelings as well. So these are related, although not exactly the same. Then perhaps we don't want to challenge someone's deeply held beliefs. When you know what the truth is, but someone else believes deeply otherwise, you may not want to express your truth because it may be too much of a shock for the other person. So not necessarily hurting that person's feelings, but just something that's shocking, surprising, turning their world upside down potentially. And it doesn't matter that you can see that these false beliefs have no basis in reality. If the other person is not ready to hear the truth, it may not be a good idea for you to say it out loud. Lastly, There are times when we don't want to tell the truth because it may be, for instance, pointing out a problem. When you are the one pointing out a problem or an issue, people may expect you to solve the problem, resolve the issue, and you may not want to take on that obligation, so you stay quiet. You may feel that you are too busy to take on additional work, additional responsibilities. So all of the above are covered under how the truth may not be beautiful. It may not be something that's pleasant. Line 2. Beautiful words are not true. So this is the same idea expressed in reverse for emphasis. And again, in this context, we have to be sure to mention that beautiful words, this is not about great literature, beautiful poetry. Those are beautiful words as well, but those are beautiful words in a positive context. Here, when Lao Tzu talks about beautiful words, he's talking about words that are beautiful but deceptive. So just to give everyone some examples, beautiful words are expressions such as distraction, words that draw attention or manipulate you in some way, draw your attention to something so that you don't notice something that's important, something you should notice. It's distraction by pointing out something else, look at the shiny object, and by averting your attention to that other thing, hopefully there's going to be a few things that slip by you that you don't notice. So for that reason, beautiful words pointing out something that's attractive is going to be harmful. They are not true, and they have a negative goal in mind. So other than distraction, it can be beautiful words that distort reality. Distortion are words that misrepresent reality, usually in your favor. For instance, someone may distort your reality by telling you that you are doing well when you are not. They may say that you are winning when you are not winning. They may tell you that people like you when they actually don't. These are distortions of reality in your favor. So you accept them, you like them, they are beautiful, but they are not true. And then the easy one is flattery. Words that appeal to your ego. It could be similar to distortion, but these are specifically about you as a person. You are great. What you did was great. You are, and then positive attributes. You are X, where X is substituted by positive or desirable attributes such as beautiful, you are brave, you are smart, and so on. So flattery would be one category of beautiful words that are not true. They're pleasant to hear. You know, hey, I want to be seen as smart. So I like those words, but perhaps I am not being smart in a particular situation, but then people are using beautiful words to distort my reality and distract my attention. Lastly, falsehoods. Here, I'm more thinking about things like false advertising, things like false, empty promises. Words, beautiful words that try to lead you to the wrong choice. Maybe buy something that you don't really need because the beautiful words promise that if you buy this, you will become even more attractive. So empty promises, words that set up false expectations. We know that words like these, beautiful words like these, are often used to devastating effect by politicians, salespeople, lawyers, scammers, and so on. These are the ones who are skillful with beautiful words that may not be true. Whereas, as cultivators of the Tao, we have a strong preference for the truth, even if the truth is unflattering, uncomfortable, or unpleasant. So that is behind the idea in line 2, beautiful words are not true. So remember, not poetry, not great literature, but like flattering remarks. Line 3, those who are good do not debate. Now let's start with the first character there, San. The meaning of San is good, kind, or virtuous, skillful, or talented. So usually good, the English word good covers this character pretty well. When we say someone is good, we may say that, well, he or she is a kind person. We may also say that someone is good when we mean that he or she is skillful at doing something, good at a particular thing, good at sports, being one possible example, good at a particular game, or good at a particular task. So here, we're talking about, we're further extending that with another character, 者, which means those who, they who, or singular, he who, she who, the one who. Combining it with san, we get those who are good, or he who is good, she who is good, one who is good, or kind, or virtuous. And with this is not about the Western concept of good versus evil. This is more like being experienced in the Tao, being skillful in the arts of living, being good at life. So literally the two characters, the first one is good, the second one is the one who. And those who are virtuous, those who are skillful in the Tao, that pretty much covers being skillful in the arts of living. So we want to be 善者. We want to be someone who is skillful in the art of living life according to the Tao. So now, Lao Tzu is being emphatic about those who are good, those who are virtuous. He says those who are good do not debate. Now, let me single out this last character here, 辩. The pinyin, as you can see, for a native English speaker, we may be tempted to say bien, but it's more like bien. Sometimes this character in this chapter gets mistranslated as argue. This is because translators usually want to stay away from the word debate. You can see I've translated the character in a straightforward fashion as debate, but many translators avoid that word. They don't want to say, they don't want to admit that Lao Tzu says those who are good do not debate. Because in the Western world, most people see debate as a positive thing. Now, let me explain why it is debate and not argue. This character in the dictionary can be translated as debate or argue. Here, it's strictly about debate. It's clear when you think about the previous two lines about beautiful words. Basically, the previous two lines express true words are not beautiful, beautiful words are not true, etc. So remember the idea behind beautiful words, words that are soothing, words that are pleasant, but untrue. Those words, pleasant but false, are used in debates, not arguments. In arguments, you would be screaming and yelling, there would be much anger, whereas in debates, there's still room for deception, for skills, for tactics, debating tactics. So beautiful words mislead and distort in order to win debates. That's how you can link the two together. Beautiful words are not used to win arguments. Generally not. You can just remember the last time you saw a debate versus an argument. It's definitely true that beautiful words were used in debates, but not in an argument. So continue on. I would suggest that this is a way to tell if the translator is in touch with authentic Tao teachings. Does the translator use the uncompromising word choice of debates? Or does the translator use something else to sidestep the issue so they don't end up saying that debate is a bad thing? Many translations actually do that. Now, this is a clear expression from Lao Tzu. It is often not translated directly because Western authors have trouble with wanting to say bad things about debate. Now, it's not just the authors. Many people in the West prefer to think of debate as a positive thing. So for many of us, this whole idea of debate as a bad thing can be a little surprising, maybe even a little bit hard to accept. Are we making a mistake here? First, I want to show that if you were to use an online translator and copy and paste this particular character, you will definitely get back debate, not argument. Argument becomes like a secondary meaning that is not used as often. Now, we also have the following line. Those who debate are not good. So this is not saying those who argue are not good. This is saying those who debate are not good. Now, those who argue may not be bad if they're arguing for a good cause, but debate can be deceptive, and therefore, this is why Lao Tzu is pointing out that it's not necessarily a good thing. So this is the same idea from the other direction in order to drive home the point. Now for Lao Tzu, the best way to debate would be not through words at all, but through actions. The best way to debate would be to avoid debate and take action instead. Use action to convince, to persuade people as to the truth of what you're saying. So he specifically talked about this many chapters ago, back in chapter 45 of the Tao of Jing. He wrote, "Great skill seems unrefined. Great eloquence seems inarticulate." This is because, this is actually connected to chapter 81, because beautiful words appear to be refined and articulate, but they are not true. Tao cultivators want the truth, not pleasant-sounding falsehoods. Therefore, they would rather be on the other side, the side of being unrefined and inarticulate, because they don't want to use beautiful words. Thus, the greatest skill in debating is to not engage in debates at all. The same goes for arguments as well. So this is actually a central idea in the Tao tradition. There's a story that I would like to share with you to illustrate that. The name of the story is called Two Hunters. Once upon a time, in ancient China, a Tao sage was traveling through the wilderness and noticed a commotion up ahead. The Tao sage got closer and saw two men engaged in a heated argument. They seemed really worked up over something. So the sage decided to find out what it was all about. It turned out the two men were hunters. They were arguing over the numbers. One of them stated that, well, you see, if you hunt 8 animals every day for 3 days, you end up with 24 animals. The other hunter disagreed. The other hunter said, no, it's 23 animals, not 24. Each of them was convinced the other was wrong. Neither one was willing to back down. They agreed, finally, to arbitration. What they would do is that they would choose a wise person to render a decision on their dispute. And the winner would take the loser's hunter game for the day. And it was at that moment that the sage approached. So the two hunters asked the sage to be their arbiter. They explained their conflicting views, and the sage listened patiently. When both sides were done explaining, the sage rendered his verdict. He pointed to the hunter who said 23. The one who said, if you got 8 animals for 3 days consecutively, you end up with 23 animals. He pointed to this hunter and said, you win. You may take what your friend has hunted today. The winner grinned happily. He took his prize and went on his way, looking satisfied and smug. The hunter who lost, the one who said 24, could hardly believe his ears. Now, he could not go against the decision from the sage because he had already sworn to be bound by arbitration. But this was an outrage. He turned to the sage. In frustration, he said, adding up 8 3 times gets you 24. This is so simple that even little kids understand it. You seem to be a wise man. How can you not know such a simple thing? The sage smiled back at him. The sage said, of course you are correct. Of course the true answer is 24. Of course it is simple. Now think about what you're doing. If someone cannot even comprehend such a simple thing, then what is the point to argue with him? The hunter was stunned. He was so caught up in the argument that he never stopped to think about what he was doing. The sage continued, that hunter thinks he has won. He's got the prize today, but he also has foolish delusions, not just today, but very likely for his entire life. You think you have lost, but in reality, you have gained a valuable lesson you will never forget. The hunter realized the truth. In the words of the sage, to argue with a fool means being even more foolish than the fool. Did he really want to identify with that? Why waste precious time when life was so finite? The end. So in this traditional Tao story, there's a number of things that we can get out of it. Let's talk about the Tao. Let's lay it out. First, I think we all know that we will also come across those with views that are obviously wrong from our perspective. You can probably think of a few right now. So this is a practical lesson from the Tao because it'll prepare us for a real life situation. Now, the question from the sage would apply to us. What exactly would be the point to argue and debate against those people who are obviously wrong? The question is, what would that accomplish exactly? how would that benefit you in a practical way? I know one way where it can be disadvantageous to you, that the time you spend with that person trying to argue, trying to change their mind, you're never going to get that time back. So as the sage pointed out, doing so, arguing or debating against fools, would make one more foolish than the fool. Life is already too short as it is. Our time in this world is finite. Why waste any of it? We can and should redirect our attention to a more worthwhile pursuit. If you make the decision to do that, then that decision will be wise. It will be congruent in keeping with the message from Tao Te Ching chapter 81, the current chapter that we are studying. So this is the story of the two hunters that has correspondence with chapter 81. If you would like to hear more from the story, I would direct your attention to chapter 7 from the book, The Tao of Tranquility, available as paperback, ebook, and audiobook. The most important thing, though, for us at this moment in time is to tie it back to chapter 81. It says, those who are good do not debate. Those who debate are not good. So there's more than one way to see the truth of that, whether with the straightforward statements from Lao Tzu or from a story as you have just heard. This is not something that only Lao Tzu talks about. It was something that all the sages talked about and were familiar with, which is why I say that it is an authentic teaching from a genuine tradition of the Tao. I would direct your attention to the other great sage, Zhuangzi. Now, there's a whole bunch of text here, which I will translate for you, but Zhuangzi had written about this topic as well. And I want to share with you exactly what he wrote. So first, this is from Zhuangzi. Zhuangzi, the term is the name for the sage, but also the name for the work that he had written. The book, the classic of Zhuangzi, is composed of 33 chapters, where chapters 1 to 7 are known as the inner chapters, 8 to 33, the outer chapters. The authorship of the inner chapters is certain to be Zhuangzi himself, but from 8 to 33, some of it might be authored by other people. In ancient times, it was customary, it was common to be inspired by a great sage and then add to what that sage has created as a way to contribute to an overall narrative. So for this particular one, it's from the writing known as the Autumn Floods, sometimes translated as the Floods of Autumn. Two characters, Qiu Sui. Qiu means autumn, Sui means water. In this case, flooding waters. So you see the three lines that Zhuangzi wrote for that particular section of autumn floods. Let me translate them for you one by one. First, with the frog in the well, one cannot talk about the ocean. It is constrained by the hole it is in. So what it means is that the frog in the well has never seen the ocean, much less been to it. It cannot fathom anything that is so much bigger than the well that it knows. So the frog is constrained physically by the well. It's useless for you to talk about the ocean with the frog. It has no concept of the ocean, period. Second line is translated as follows. With an insect of summer, one cannot talk about ice. It knows nothing beyond its season. Its season is summer, the warm days, the warm temperatures of summer. Just as the frog is constrained physically by the well, the insect is constrained chronologically by its brief lifespan. It cannot live long enough to experience the colder temperatures of winter, so it cannot know what ice is. It's equally useless for you to talk about ice. With this insect, it has no conception of ice. Last paragraph there. With a scholar of limited views, one cannot talk about the Tao. He is bound by what he was taught. So here, Zhuangzi is comparing the dogmatic scholar to the frog and the insect. Limited understanding of the scholar is like physical and chronological constraints. Although it is possible for human beings to change and break out of those constraints, it is the exception rather than the rule. And until there's some kind of breakthrough, it doesn't serve any purpose for someone who knows about the Tao to talk to someone who's closed-minded to the Tao. The Tao itself is represented here by the ocean. The vastness of the ocean symbolizes the limitless expanse of the Tao. Now let me turn that back around and point out that if you are in this meeting or listening to this recording, chances are very good that you are one of the exceptional individuals. Most people cannot change, some can. And I hope that all of us in this meeting are capable of change. At the very least, we are the ones who know about ice. We have seen the ocean. Now we want to make our way there, metaphorically. So being capable of change, it means we have the ability to tap into this inner potential for transformation. That inner potential is called Buddha nature in Buddhism. At the same time, we know that these lines that we're seeing on the screen, these describe most people very well, because most people by and large are still limited and not ready to change. Many are not even aware of their constraints. When that is the case, it is not a useful or productive expenditure of your time to try to force them to change. That is the point that Zhuangzi is trying to make. So as you can see, there's actually extensive writings about this whole idea of debating or even just talking about discussing something. So let's take a look at the reasons why people are for debates and the reasons why Lao Tzu will be against it. We've got the pro-debate perspective and the Tao perspective side by side for contrast. Someone who thinks debates are a good thing may say, we end up with a better understanding of the other side as a result of having a debate. The Tao perspective says, let's be real, we end up more bitterly divided than before. I think this should not be a surprise because we're living this right now. We're seeing it on a daily basis. Yes, many people do think debate is a good thing, and yet, despite people thinking that, we are still deeply divided today as a society. So the debates haven't really helped at all. We learn from the debates and increase knowledge. The Tao perspective says, we learn from the debate, yes, but not increasing our knowledge of the subject that was debated. What people learn from a debate is that they practice their debating skills. They sharpen their debating skills. Next time, they're going to know better how to mislead, distort, contort a point until it fits with the narrative that they want to express in order to persuade or convince. That's rather cynical, but it is reality. Someone who likes debates may say, look, we can settle our differences through debates. From the Tao perspective, debates are exchange of words. Words ultimately won't do anything by themselves. We can better settle our differences through proactive, mindful actions, not debates. The pro-debate perspective continues, well, listen, each side will learn where it should modify its views as a result of having had that debate. Now you can guess where Lao Tzu would come down on that assertion. Lao Tzu would say, no, each side becomes more entrenched in its views. Looking around, I think you will see that this is more true than not. After a debate, nobody's mind really got changed. Everybody becomes ever more entrenched. Oftentimes, the pro-debate perspective will say, let the best ideas win. Whereas the Tao perspective points out, really, the best ideas will win? Then how is it that both sides claim victory? So which were the best ideas? Did they really win? Now we see this, we have seen this quite a few times. Every time we have a presidential debate, no matter how the candidates did, right after the debate, both sides claim victory. It takes quite some time before history renders a definitive verdict as to who won and who lost. Usually, when the votes are cast and tallied. And after that, when historians review what actually happened. So, not necessarily true that the best ideas will win. It's unfortunate, but that's reality. Lastly, pro-debate perspective may say, participants become more refined and articulate. They become better speakers. They can articulate their views. They can express themselves better, etc. Lao Tzu would say, yeah, they become more refined and articulate. They learn to use beautiful words. Beautiful words are refined and articulate words that are not true. So you can begin to see why sages will be against debates in general. Here's a little bit more on their perspective. A lot of times we will say that, well, debates, that is the basis of our democracy. Or the question may be asked, what is wrong with healthy, civil debates? One that advances all of us and educates everyone who maintains an open mind. Well, the cynical but sad truth is that this idealized fantasy vanishes upon contact with reality. It becomes more toxic than healthy, more angry than civil, and people quickly become defensive instead of open-minded. So as far as being the basis for our democracy, it's the voting franchise of informed citizens that is the true basis of our democracy. We can still be informed, and this chart is meant to illustrate that. The bar on the right approximates the emotional content of human interaction. We begin in that progression of interaction with statement of position. That is, people talk about the reasoning. They talk about the points in their position. They talk about supporting evidence. Why do I believe what I believe? Then, following that, there may be discussion. That is, there may be questions and answers to attain better clarification. When you said this, did you mean that? Clarification is good for everyone who participates in that discussion process. Then, that is positive and constructive. So everything that we have talked about so far contributes to the betterment of democracy. It contributes to harmonious coexistence of us and fellow human beings. All of this we can categorize as positive. Then we start moving into the debate stage. Beyond discussion, there's debates, and there may not be a clear distinction between what is a discussion, what is a debate. These stages in the progression blend into each other. So in a debate, there's point, counterpoint, there's rebuttal, and so on. Now, the debate can quickly degenerate into something worse. It can become arguments. That is, it becomes more like a shouting match. Even when it doesn't devolve into a shouting match, a debate can take on a deceptive quality that one side can be using false information or false logic to mislead the debate in order to win the debate. Then, beyond argument, it can go into altercation. It begins perhaps when someone is pushing or shoving another person. This results in physical conflict that can escalate. And then beyond this point, warfare. That is armed conflict. So at that point, it is of course negative and destructive. Throughout this entire process, it's gradual shading from one to the other, where debate is serving as a turning point of the two. Debates usually, they can and often do start with calm and rational minds. But as the debate progresses, you can feel the calmness and rationality slip away bit by bit. Perhaps someone will then make a remark that the other side feels is outrageous or illogical or both. So emotionally, the temperature goes up. Then it starts to head downhill from there. As I said, it becomes ever more toxic, ever more angry, and defensive. So now I think you can get a better idea why Lao Tzu said what he said. And having talked about that, I see that we are a little bit over the time that we have allocated for today. So now we need to go to summary. Let's summarize what we have talked about today in terms of debates, in terms of beautiful words. How do we live in accordance with the Tao according to Lao Tzu? Number one, Lao Tzu would say that we need to be truthful. We need to utter true words rather than beautiful words. We need to be the one to say something that should be said, even if it's unpleasant, even if it's uncomfortable, because ultimately it is honesty that will be the best policy. Number 2, refrain from getting into debates. So this is what we have just talked about. Not easy. In our Western society, we still have very deep-seated ideas that debates can be a good thing. That, hey, maybe I'll learn something. Well, that's the idealized fantasy. So recognize that no one really wins debates. Not really. If you lose a debate, of course, that's a bad thing. If you win a debate, is that a good thing though? What about the resentment the other side now feels towards you? The Tao sage would say, not worth it. Number 3, narrow your focus on the most important things in life. This is something that we will talk about next time. It's important because spiritual power corresponds with simplicity. The more you simplify, the greater you are in terms of your spiritual power. Therefore, you want to ultimately identify the one thing that is the most meaningful to you, simplify with that in mind. So we'll talk about that more next time. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.